All right. Good morning, all. Can anybody hear me? Yes, that's a good start. So, good morning, everybody. Welcome to Intro to Buddhism and Meditation, live on location at an unknown destination. Um, we'll go ahead and we'll start with an offering. So, if you can all join palms and repeat after me. I take refuge in the Buddha. I take refuge in the Dharma. I take refuge in the Sangha. And you can put the palms down. So good to see everybody. Thank you for being here. Um, I always like to take the first couple minutes and just start with a kind of simple question. Um, and just to give a few minutes for the millions of followers to join in. Um, but how about a question this morning? Um, any bad habits that you've stopped since this quarantine has begun? And you may not want to get into details. Um, so a simple response of yes would do or no would do. Um, but as everybody's jumping on here, why don't we just take a couple minutes? And there's a little chat box there if you're new to YouTube. And you can just chime in with, have you stopped any bad habits over the last couple months? And we'll take a couple minutes for people to respond. And when I say bad, it's interesting too, because even when I refer to Buddhist teachings and what I've learned is I don't like to look at things as bad or good. Um, but to put it into Buddhist terms, you can use wholesome or unwholesome. You can use ideas such as harmful to self and others or beneficial to self and others. Um, you can use ideas such as having a a good intention, um, or maybe a greedy intention. But things to really reflect on at a time like this where you have an opportunity to really focus on yourself a lot and be able to explore, am I changing my behaviors? Am I changing my actions? Um, and if so, how? And then begin to reflect on how are these benefiting my life and helping my life. So, well, I'm happy to see a lot of yeses. It's good to know that you're all drastically changing your lives as you're locked inside. Um, and if some of you maybe are thinking, no, I haven't changed anything, um, then that's okay too. It's just maybe a moment to reflect on, what could I change or do I want to change? And how will I go about doing that? So, with that being said, we'll go ahead and we'll start the meditation practice. For those who are maybe here for the first time, um, or sitting with me for the first time, there's a couple things I'll tell you before we begin. Nothing's going to happen to you. You won't float away. You won't have any mystical, magical experiences. Uh, the mind that Races all day long is not going to shut off. Don't judge your practice, meaning don't ask yourself, is this working? Is it not working? Am I doing this right? Am I doing this wrong? We're just going to sit and we're going to breathe. You'll hear sounds inside the room you're in, outside. This is life. Life is filled with sounds. And the practice of meditation is learning to get quiet and still within all of these sounds. So, posture, just finding a position that's comfortable. If you're on a cushion, often it helps sliding to the front third, pushing your stomach forward, allowing the back to straighten, shoulders relaxed, hands can be on the knees or in the lap, whatever's comfortable for you. I'll suggest closing the eyes if comfortable. Mouth will be open or closed, whatever's comfortable. I will guide us as we begin, and we'll settle into a little bit of silence. Most important with the practice is don't expect anything. We're just going to sit and breathe. And starting with the eyes closed once again, or slightly open, mouth is open or closed. We'll start with taking 3 deep breaths slowly. And eventually, we'll settle into a natural rhythm of the breath. Noticing the mind as it wanders, and jumping from thought to thought. We'll start with gently guiding the attention and focus to the stomach or chest. And breathing in, feel them rise. And breathing out, they fall. You're simply going to continue this practice, observing sensation of breath, expecting nothing but to sit and breathe. As the mind wanders, lost in thought, recognize it, release that thought, return attention, focus to the breath. Where's your mind? Lost in thought. Return attention, focus to the breath. Letting go of expectations, letting go of judgment, just sitting, breathing. Where's your mind? Return to breath. keeping the mind alert. Each thought, each physical sensation, yet concerned with nothing but sitting, breathing. And with the body still, resting, and the speech quiet, aware of all sounds, and the mind learning to settle, know what it's like to just sit and breathe, knowing with each breath, nowhere else to go, no one else to be. Everything beautiful, exactly as it is, sitting, breathing, and once again, taking 3 deep breaths slowly, and as you slowly open the eyes, slowly begin to move, and most important, with the practice of meditation, is to recognize how you feel now, immediately after. Compare this to how you typically feel throughout your day. Recognize the difference, if there is one, and ask yourselves how you'd prefer to feel every day for the rest of your life. And realize however you feel now, if it's quiet, calm, and still, or a busy mind, racing mind, whatever you're sitting with at this moment has nothing to do with anything I said. It's nothing to do with how we sit and hold the hands or cross the legs. Nothing to do with the sounds around us or anything else for that matter. It has everything to do with your own mind and your own mind's reaction to an external condition. This is what the Buddha called pratitya samuppada, means dependent origination. This is the basis of the Buddha's awakening. The word Buddha simply means awakened. He was a human being no different than anyone in this room who began to understand why he suffered, why he got angry, sad, depressed, stressed, anxious. He began to understand the causal relationship of all phenomena. And what that means very simply for all of us is, regardless of where we come from or what we believe in or where we think we're going, our whole life is filled with things that happen. We react. This is learning what it's like to respond to something quietly, peacefully, still. For most of us, the way you respond to the last 20 minutes is quite different from how you respond to everything else that's happening throughout your day. And all we're working on is closing the gap to where the way you feel now is closer to how you feel always. Just as driven, motivated, productive, successful, whatever that means to you in your respective lives. But with a mind that's steady, clear, focused, distracted by nothing, disturbed by no one. Meditation is free. Buddhist practice is free. Sitting, breathing, learning to be kind to yourself and everybody else. This doesn't change. Regardless of the situation around us, regardless of everything we see and read and watch and experience, Buddhist practice is every moment of your life. The mistake people often make is thinking that there's their whole life and then there's this Buddhist meditation thing that's going to be separate from their whole lives. And this separation is actually what causes your suffering. Because you struggle all day long, stressed and anxious and scared and worried and angry. And then we run to meditation or to our Buddhist book or to our little Buddhist getaway, thinking that that'll fix all of our stuff. When in reality, it's just a reflection. It's a moment to explore. Why do I do what I do? And that's it. So when you close the gap and you realize that your life is Buddhist practice and Buddhist practice is your life, then your life gets simpler. Doesn't mean all the horrific things in the world change. It doesn't mean you're all of a sudden free to safely go outside. But your response in all of those things is much different because you're taking care of your mind, your words, your actions. So with that, I'd like to stop. And as always, especially for those who are joining us for the first time, welcome. I just prefer to open up to questions that you might have. Again, on the screen somewhere, there's a little chat box, and you can type in your questions, and I'll respond. I can touch on pretty much anything you want with regards to meditation or Buddhist practice, but I'd always prefer to respond to your questions as opposed to going into whatever's on my mind. So I'll open it up now for questions, and we use the remainder of this time for that. Oh, it's funny. I'm just looking at the. Um, oh yeah. So I was looking at the last comment from Marcel where it says clearing away unnecessary material things, which is, yeah, really wonderful practice. And then I just saw Samir's question, so I'll touch on that in a second. But when I read the clearing away unnecessary material things, always a good practice. And immediately I thought about clearing away unnecessary mental things or emotional things. And, we tend to carry physical attachments, mental attachments, emotional attachments. And these attachments, these clingings, these cravings are what cause our suffering. They are really representations of or reflections of our ego, our pride, our greed, our anger, our ignorance. Um, we hold on to things as if the material thing is important. We hold on to mental, emotional thoughts as if they're important, and often they cause suffering. So, as you're working on clearing away unnecessary material things, see what unnecessary mental and emotional things you can clear away also. Um, and in fact, a lot of the material things that we're attached to um, are really tied to mental and emotional thoughts to begin with. So, to Samir's question, speaking of material things, I tend to get really angry, annoyed, or anxious when a material object that I own is stained or broken. Well, the funny thing is, you think you own it. We have this idea based on a construct in our society that we have this thing called money, and we buy something, and then the thing becomes ours, and that we possess it, and then we own it. Um, I've learned through this practice of Buddhist teachings to try to remove or clear away this idea of ownership. Um, ownership is a very self driven, I driven, ego driven thing. I own this and it's mine. Now, these patterns and conditioned behaviors start really young. So often I like to say it's not your fault, you're not alone. But think of a child with a toy and they have the toy. It's not even theirs. They go to a friend's house and they pick up a toy and they think, oh, this is my toy right now. And then it gets taken from them. So they feel that they've lost something that was theirs, that they owned it. Well, they never owned it to begin with. They have it in their possession at that moment, and then it gets passed on. And very often, when you take away that toy from that child, maybe you give them another toy, and they're so easily um, comfortable again with whatever toy is in their hands. And we tend to think that that object that we're holding is ours. But as all conditioned phenomena are in Buddhist teachings, they come together for a period of time and then cease to exist. So I try to not look at things as ownership. I look at things as this is what I have at this moment. I think it's the red violin. Someone here's probably seen it. Marisa can probably help me out or somebody else, but I think it's the red violin. But it's a great about kind of the life of this violin from century to possession of this violin. So I really think when you look at the Eightfold Path, Samir, um, for those who are brand new to Buddhism, you have the Four Noble Truths. That's the first thing the Buddha taught. Life is filled with dukkha, which is suffering, discomfort, angst, dissatisfaction. We struggle a lot. The second noble truth is the cause. greed, anger, and ignorance. The third noble truth is the ending of suffering, nirvana, liberation, freedom from suffering. And the fourth one is the path. And this is the eightfold path. And this is really the heart of Buddhist teachings, is in implementing the eightfold path into our lives. And the eightfold path is correct views, thoughts, speech, action, livelihood, effort, mindfulness, concentration. And these do go in order, and they start with the correct views. So in this example of things you own, that would be an incorrect view. That would be a view based on ignorance, that you own it, that just because it's in your possession, that there's some sort of, and I'm not talking about legality, you know, um, it's a matter of possessing things. Have something in our possession, my suggestion would be try to utilize it in whatever way you can, hopefully in a beneficial manner while you have it, but understand that it's only there for a period of time and it will go away. Um, Specifically to material object that is stained or broken, again, incorrect view, meaning we have a view of how we think something should look like. I was just looking for something in here I can break. Um, I don't know. I'm really not feeling like breaking this glass over my head. But we have these fixed ideas of thing. We don't like that because we have an idea of how we wanted it to be, and now it's different. The question of why attachment expectations, yes, that's what I'm talking about. We're attached to things being a certain way. We're attached to them working how we want them to work. We're expecting them to be how we can be with people too, people, places, things. One of the great practices that I've learned or expressions in Buddhist teachings is from anyone ever. And for me, that's been a very beautiful practice of I don't expect anyone. I don't expect anything from anyone ever. And that's very liberating to not have expectations of people or things. Appreciate the moments that you have something and that it comes together, and find gratitude knowing that it'll only be there for a period of time and then it'll fade away. And Samir could be making a plug. He listened to some old talks I gave, and I've often talked about in my early Buddhist days. I started at 2003 at the temple, and I was really into my Mustangs, and I had to have a convertible. I grew up driving convertibles, and so I was like, first 2 years into Buddhist practice and trying to integrate this stuff in my life, but also really attached to my brand new Mustang every year. And so what I did was my middle path, and I don't suggest you try this at home, but I still wanted my Mustang. But as soon as I drove off the lot with my brand new Mustang, I then took my own key and I keyed the side of it, um, because we see this brand new car and we think, oh, it's perfect. And the first ding, the first scratch, the first little shopping cart that bumps into it, we're furious, like, oh no, you ruined my car. And then 6 months, a year later, it's got all these dents and dings and scratches, and we really don't care anymore. But we just paid all this money and we want everything to be perfectly clean. Um, for me, the hardest practice has been cleaning and purifying the mind. Hopefully that's helpful. Again, I'm not suggesting you key your own car, but I've done lots of crazy things on this journey to help me overcome my attachments. And at least then I wasn't pissed off at anybody else for denting my car. I put the first scratch on it, and any scratch that came after that was no longer the first scratch. So it worked for me. Yes, The Red Violin. Thank you, Marisa. Beautiful movie. Yes. Marcus Aurelius once said, "You don't. You always own the option of having no opinion." Does this jive with Buddhist thought? And if we have no opinion on matters, where does compassion come from? I'm definitely not one who's going to like. Well, I can't anyways. But Marcus Aurelius, and I think the Stoic teachings and practice is really beautiful. And I think there are a lot of similarities. I've never studied Stoicism, but I have a good friend who loves Buddhism and loves Stoicism, and he reads a lot of Marcus Aurelius and compares them both a lot. Um, think the question of you always own the option of having no opinion. Um, Having no opinion is actually still an opinion, and that I would say, uh, I mean, to answer your question directly, I would say that that's not really a Buddhist thought, because again, any opinion I have is still an opinion. If I choose to have no opinion on something, then that's my choice. Often we say, well, I'm not going to do anything about it, but doing nothing about it is actually doing something. You're doing nothing, and nothing is definitely something. So I wouldn't say that that's a Buddhist thought, at least not from my lens of Buddhism. And I think that kind of answers your second question of where does compassion come from? And that's kind of why. I mean, if we have no opinion on things, no view of things, um, in reality, it's going to be very difficult to cultivate compassion. Now, I get it. One of my favorite quotes from Thich Nhat Hanh is all views are wrong. But to me, what I learned from that teaching is that we have our views and we are attached to them. We have our opinions and we are attached to them. I don't, in a practical, conventional sense, think that someday I'm going to wake up and just have no opinions and no views. I have them, but how selfish are they? How greedy are they? How angry are they? And when I recognize the anger in my views towards self or others, can I have compassion to overcome them? So, we're going to continue to have views and opinions and judgments. I think it's foolish. I know, Ro, this isn't what you mean, but I think it's foolish for us to think that one day we're just going to wake up and all our opinions and views are going to be gone. It's just not the case. So, how do we participate as citizens on this planet? Yeah, again, I mean, to me, the heart of the Buddhist teachings is that's what the Buddhist teachings are. They're telling us how to participate as humans, and that is with loving kindness, that is with compassion, that is with joy, that is with equanimity. That is, to me, the six paramitas, or generosity and morality and patience and diligence and concentration and wisdom. Uh, all of the core fundamental Buddhist teachings is how to participate on this, judge them. And we think, I call this Buddhist arrogance, where I remember my first 6 months or year or so at the Buddhist temple, I was just like drastically changing how I lived. And now all of a sudden I was turning around and judging all these people that I was just doing things with 3 months ago. I stopped hanging out with my buddies and I thought I was better than they were because I was all Buddhist. When in fact, judging them for being who they were was actually the least Buddhist thing I could do. So I eventually, it took me about 2 years, but I eventually worked through a place where I could still spend time with them and just not participate and do the same things they were doing. Judgment, or recognizing your judgments, is I think a really beautiful practice. And to not judge people to the point where we have reached a place where we think we're better than they are. So, if I was judging them for doing something, like I said, that I was doing 3 months ago, a wife did the same thing to their first car when they married, as you avoid an argument over who did it first. Yeah, I bet that went over pretty well. Um, so, real Stoicism and Buddhism have many similarities. Yes, Molly. Why did you choose to practice Zen Buddhism versus one of the other traditions? For me, it was really a couple things. It wasn't even a choice to do, but when I was in college at the age of 20, so this would be 25 years ago, I took a Chinese civilization class, Chinese Civ 174. My brother said it would be an easy A, so that's why I took it. It was an easy A, and we had to read Intro to Zen by D.T. Suzuki. So that was the first Buddhist book that was put in my hands. I was drawn to the teachings of Suzuki, D.T. Suzuki initially, from the beginning, and then I continued to read Zen stuff over the years. And then the temple that I ended up at in 2003 for the first time, and this would have been 8 years after I started reading Buddhist stuff. My best friend growing up, Kristen, said, "Hey, Jeff, do you want to come check out this temple?" And it happened to be a Chan, which is the Chinese word for Zen, Buddhist temple, a mixture of Chan and Pure Land practice. So I didn't necessarily choose it. It's just where I ended up, and it really spoke to me and my practice, my personality. But I heard someone say years ago that if you really love Zen, you should go to a Tibetan space, and if you really love Tibetan Buddhism, you should go to a Zen practice. So even the forms of practice we have, uh, I think we can become attached to. So we want to be careful with that. But I would say, yeah, I didn't choose it. It just is what ended up in my lap. Other questions? Oh, the other thing I'll say on schools of Buddhism is, obviously, as you know, Molly, the Dharma Bum Temple, we're not a specific lineage or school of Buddhism. Our focus and practice is on introducing all the different schools of Buddhism to people, or a handful of them. And I think that's important, especially at the level most of us are at with Buddhist practices, to just be aware of different types of Buddhist practice, and then really see what kind of resonates with you, and see what happens. But to think that one school is better than the other is not healthy, and to think that you know often people ask me what type of Buddhist, say the good type, because we can get wrapped up. I used to listen to people like debate and argue over why their school of Buddhism is better than another, and I just think that's the most un-Buddhist thing you can do. So I heard someone say, kind of cringed, again, that was my judgment, but that their learning about Buddhism, they were trying to classify and label someone as a Theravadan Buddhist or a Zen Buddhist. Um, to me, the practice is about looking at someone as they're human, and they have taken this way of practice into their life, but to not judge them as better or worse than the other. What are the difference between the Buddhist practices? The differences are in many ways cultural. Uh, what I mean by that is different cultures have been exposed to Buddhist teachings and kind of made it their own. Understand himself was from India, and so he taught in India, and that was really the start of Buddhist practice. And then I don't know, maybe 100 years after he died, or somewhere, it goes south to Southeast Asia. You go into Thailand, Laos, and have Buddhism. And then about 500 years later, around the turn of the century, um, and again, he lived 500 years before Christ. So 100 years later, it goes Southeast Asia. And then about 600 years later, it goes north into China, Japan, Korea, Northern Asia. And then about 1,000 years after the Buddha died, it went into Tibet. And you have the cultivation and the beginning of Tibetan Buddhism. And then, I don't know, maybe 100 years ago, it slowly works its way west into US and Europe and Canada. And I think it's important to understand that as Buddhism enters a new country, it meshes with that existing culture. So, China, for example, as Buddhism went into China, um, you have Taoism, you have Confucianism, um, and you have Shinto practice as well. And these are really meshed with Buddhist teachings. So there are cultural influences at the beginning. Um, I think that are important to understand. There's really the heart of what the Buddha taught, and then there's how each culture carries them out. So the core teachings, I think, are really the same, regardless of what school of Buddhism you look at. And if you go into a temple, they'll be chanting a lot of the same sutras and the same teachings. It'll just be maybe very loud and colorful, and you go into a Zen practice and they'll be really exploring the same teachings, but maybe it'll be silent and they'll be staring at a wall. So culturally, they're very different. But the heart of the teachings are the heart of the teachings with some variations. And yeah, I saw talks the last 2 weeks on YouTube posted. Yeah, so Travis, who's very skilled and knowledgeable as well. Um, uh, Marisa just shared that the last 2 weeks, investigating the various practices. So if you scroll through our YouTube channel here, you'll see Travis's talks there, where he obviously would go into a lot more detail than I just did in the last 2 minutes. Um, but I find that the practices differ in ritual and cultural influence than the core teachings themselves. Um, the Death and Current Financial System. Do you know of books or people who mesh these two? Um, I don't. Uh, Often people talk about that Buddhism being so hard nowadays or so hard in this culture. There was the caste system in India when the Buddha was alive. Um, they had the merchants, they had the peasants, they had um, the royal class folks. He was a prince. So just because we have like flashy cars and watches and Xbox and um, all kinds of fancy stuff around us, they had it back then too. Um, so I don't think we can just say that. And I'm not saying you're saying this, Marcel, but I don't think we can say that. Well, it's more challenging now in a capitalistic society. There has always been greed, there's always been anger, and there's always been ignorance. And specifically, the question of is there a book meshing the two? I think any Buddhist book you read will help you understand how to bring Buddhist practice into today's life. But to be careful in thinking that today's life is that much different than it was 2,500 years ago. We just have different stuff. Um, do you find that eyes closed meditation and eyes open meditation have different effects on the mind? Yeah, I mean, I'm a person in the Zen practice of the eyes open meditation. I just think that we live our lives with our eyes open. And so for me, it's just gazing off the edge of my nose, picking a spot in front of me, and holding my attention there. So when I do my practice, my eyes are open. When I lead you all, my eyes are open. Um, they're just looking straight down and holding my spot on a gaze in front of me. Eyes closed meditation, that's fine as well. I just, for me personally, and for many, for doing this for so long and talking with so many people, that when your eyes are closed, one, you have a tendency to fall asleep. Two, you have a tendency to daydream. Three, you have a tendency to like just have visualizations or let your mind wander to stuff. If you're just staring at a spot on the floor, that's all you're doing is staring at a spot on the floor. So for me as a Zen practitioner, I prefer eyes open, gazing at one spot. I would suggest trying the different types of practices, eyes open, eyes closed, see what it does for you. But ultimately, maybe settle on one and stick with that. To attachments, can there be degrees of differentiation when a material object is seen more as a necessity versus a nice to have? A home shelter versus a set of golf clubs, food versus a toy. Um, Again, it's how you use them. And, uh, the answer to that question, I guess, is maybe yes and no and somewhere in between. Um, the Buddha was a homeless wandering beggar, and he had seven objects. He had a robe, he had a bowl, he had a razor to shave his head, he had a stone to sharpen the razor, he had a strainer to sift out water so no bugs were, to sift out bugs so no water were killed. They had the thread to sew the robe. So he had seven objects. I think the first thing is to recognize what we in our own minds as practitioners will justify as necessities. Um, we call shelter a necessity. It's not a necessity. Um, we have conditioned ourselves to think that we must have shelter to be alive. Not true. Um, would we be extremely cold, extremely hot, extremely uncomfortable? Would there be challenges? Absolutely. But you don't need shelter to be alive. You definitely don't need a set of golf clubs to be alive. Um, But I think it's not necessarily a healthy approach to compare one and how you use it. Food versus a toy. Obviously we must to live, but we definitely don't need the amount of food that we eat typically. I mean, think of all the food that gets away. Tons of food are thrown away every year. How much when we food do we even eat it? My time in the monastery, one of the most beautiful practices there was we had a bowl. We would push it out to the front. Food would be put in it. We'd bring it back. It was silent, and we ate every single thing that was in the bowl. Not, we would pour tea in it or water, whatever we had, and we would stir it, and then we would drink that. So there was nothing left in the bowl. We waste so much food. Even food, we call food a necessity, which it is, but we don't treat food like a necessity. We treat food like it's a luxury. We treat food like it's this, status thing. We treat, I mean, look how much we pay to go to these restaurants. It's ridiculous. And I'm someone who used to spend paying like $35 for 6 raviolis with pasta sauce and a little, you know, green thing on top of it. Like that's ridiculous. Um, so I think we have to be careful about what we refer to as necessities and how we've justified in our mind what we need. Um, we do need food to survive, but we probably don't need the amount of food nor the type of food um, that we partake in. Um, so really, the degrees of differentiation isn't so much about the material object. Uh, it's our relationship to whatever it is. So hopefully that's helpful. Yes, I know you need your air conditioning, Samir. Um, you I think it's important to recognize that we don't have to torture ourselves. Um, last week I did the meditation outside and was attacked by mosquitoes, so I made the choice today to do it inside and not be attacked by mosquitoes. I'm not sitting here thinking I'm a terrible Buddhist because I came inside today. I think you got to give yourself a judgment that I did not want to sit outside and get attacked. Judgment, an opinion, and a view that said I'm going to come inside and do this inside. So I'm not going to sit here for the past hour or next 5 hours and think, oh no, I'm a terrible Buddhist because I chose to come inside and do it here. Like we don't have inside or outside. Both are the same. It's just how my mind chooses to recognize the two situations. So look at the attachments we have um, to these things. The attachment we have to comfort. You know, I'm attached to wanting to be comfortable while I lead this class. So I sat here. Um, Again, it doesn't mean I'm a terrible Buddhist or a terrible person. I just recognize my attachment to comfort. So here I am. All right, last one here. Through my practice, I've learned to appreciate the lovely things I do have, but not crave more. Yeah, I think that's great. I know again, I sometimes for me, I use personal examples, but when I first got into Buddhism, those first couple of years, like I got rid of everything. I come from a consulting background where I used to have a lot of money, and I got in this place where I thought money and stuff was bad or wrong, and I gave it all away for the most part. Um, Now I wish I had the tide or the things that I had. These things can be used for good, and I agree that this practice will help you appreciate what you have. It doesn't mean you have to get rid of all your stuff. Um, but yes, I agree that the practice can also help us not crave more. We have some nice things, beautiful, keep them. You don't need to empty your house. But we also probably don't need the things we continue to consume and consume. Again, it's the Kerouac from the Kerouac quote. Work, produce, consume. Work, produce, consume. We're stuck in this. We work, produce, consume, work, produce, consume, and then we just throw it all away and we buy more. So um, it's kind of the world we're stuck in. Anything else before we close here? All right, so we'll go ahead and join palms. May the benefit of this practice be shared with all beings in all directions. May all beings be at peace. May all be free from suffering. So thank you all for joining us. I'm going to close a little bit quicker than normal, um, without my normal spiel at the end. But last thing I will say is please stay home. I think it's an incredible Buddhist practice to do things that are mindful and compassionate of others, which include that don't put others at risk or in harm. So let's practice not putting others at risk, and let's practice not put all for being here. Again, be well, be safe, and we'll see you soon.